not what they used to be. So, but you were talking about psych evals, no psych evals. So, how did they? Was it just up to the case officer then, or just up to your
Yeah,
handler to determine that?
exactly. There was just really nobody else. There was not even a hint that I was being introduced to somebody who I could have, really didn't have any competency other than just talking to me. So there was nothing there.
Well, so you're going. I mean, so you're obviously there's a lot of reasons why you're going using different covers and different trips to get into the United States. So kind of let everybody know. It sounds like spy versus spy. We're trying to catch people, but there's a fundamental reason too why you're making all of these cutouts, all of these different trips. What was it that was most important that you were trying to protect for your new cover identity, Jack Barsky, to get you into the country to where you didn't have this trail following you?
The reason, and again, I put this all together. Nobody ever really explained reasons to me, and this was they shared with me what they thought only the things that I should know to be capably operational, and that because compartmentalization was huge in the KGB. But that was also counterproductive because when you operate as a lone wolf and you got to make your own decisions and you don't have a good foundation to make the right decision, you're going to make mistakes. This I pieced together in hindsight. Uh, for me to wind up in the United States without possibly being traced back to Moscow, we went from Moscow to Belgrade, Yugoslavia. That was a communist country, but it was a little closer to the west. And then I went to a neutral country, Austria, Vienna. And then from there, we went to a NATO country, uh, Rome, Italy. And from there, we got closer to the United States, Mexico City. And from there, I, I, I traveled to the United States with a Canadian passport, which in hindsight was also very dangerous because one thing I knew that Canadians don't speak like Americans.
Hey.
And I was taught to speak like an American. So I was really concerned that if I had an interview with many questions and answers, they would have figured out this can't be a Canadian.
Well, they would have asked you if you know what Putain was and who was the greatest hockey player ever at the time, and
Well, I actually knew Guy Lafleur. As a matter of fact, I was in the forum during my Montreal stay. I was in the forum when Guy Lafleur broke the record for most games um, scored in one season, home game, most goals in home games. So yeah, I would have known that, but I would have failed any kind of interview. Period. And what are you doing? What is this radio for? And wait a minute, you came from. What did you do in Mexico City? Tourism. Well, you don't look like you spent any length of time in Mexico. I would have been busted. It was, and this is why I'm thinking a lot of my colleagues, and this is bona fide evidence came out of the KGB archives. In the late 70s to the mid 80s, they trained 10 of us. Nothing else is known about the 10 other than I know about myself and one other who I met in Germany. But my guess is the failure rate was very high.
wow. So you would say your guess is so the 10 is who ended up being successfully.
No, the 10 were trained. There's nothing else known about what happened to them and whether they were launched and whether they failed or not.
Okay.
That's not in the archive. So
Well, and that's what that led me to the question I wanted to ask you too. So by the time you actually were in Mexico City getting ready to come into the United States on a Canadian passport, how many years from the first time you got approached until you are now there at the border, how many years has it taken now to get you to this point?
a little over 5 years.
And see that's what I want people to understand is that when you have adversaries, part of the intelligence game, right, is I think that's what one thing Russia did better in a lot of areas than the United States. It's the issue of patience.
Yeah, the long game. We played the long game, and we know that the Chinese are playing a very long game.
Very long game. So you're at the border. At what point does you get that first sense of relief? I mean, how does the interview go, and when do you get that stamp on your passport that says "Welcome to the United States"?
Well, as soon as I'm past uh, customs, I'm now through the border. And the first thing I did, I just found a place where I could sit down and smoke a cigarette. And I was really tense. I was really tense. So now I had to find a place to stay. And I picked out a hotel from the Yellow Pages. And that was another point of danger that I should have been caught. Just real quick, I wound up in the south side of Chicago, not knowing where I was. It was dark already. So
Well,
as
no,
I
that's not getting caught. That would have been mugged, robbed. Your
Well,
operation may have
nowadays,
come to an end without any intelligence services
Yeah, and
involved.
but the point being that there was I wouldn't have known what to do if I'm being mugged or robbed and I have no more money because there were no Soviets in Chicago.
hmm
What would I have done? What the heck would I have done? I think my my as I'm thinking what I probably might have done is like go to a church and ask for help,
hmm
and come up with a bogus story.
But like you said, anything that you would have had to do like that just would have not that one act in and of itself would have put you in danger or blown your cover, but it's the accumulation of things, right? It's one thing here, it's a little thing here.
Yeah,
Pretty soon it starts adding up, doesn't it?
and again, and the same thing was when I applied for a U.S. passport. I should have been discovered there as well. So there were a number of danger points where I just got very lucky. This isn't just all competence, but I managed to actually react to the dangerous situations I found myself in a way that I got through. So again, kudos to the two people who evaluated me.
Herman and Nikolai.
Yeah,
Well, but see again, that goes back to it. Sometimes do you need a psychologist or people who have the actual operational experience who knows what it takes in the field to get through?
it's a good point.
Well, and I can tell you this too: all the traders the United States have, all of them have probably passed psychological evaluation. So, not that is always the best indicator. So, tell us about the transformation into Jack Barsky now. So, now that you've made it in there, you're in Chicago. Fortunately, not getting mugged. How do you start transforming yourself into Jack Barsky?
So I took a flight to New York City. That was my destination. And in
Still
those
under your
days,
cover that you came into the United States on?
no, 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 no. I changed into Jack Barsky rather quickly when I realized I needed to move out of the hotel in the South Side, and this is where I created danger to myself because I tried to burn the Canadian passport, and that didn't go very well because it created a lot of smoke, and there was a smoke detector that didn't go off. Again, I would have been caught right then
In
and
your
there.
hotel room?
Yes.
Did, why did you burn it? Why not just turn it up into little shreds and flush it down the
Well,
toilet?
passport destruction 101 was not part of my training.
Those little
Yeah,
things, yeah.
when I realized that's what the thing was smoking, I threw the thing in the toilet and then I shredded it. So okay.
there you
So,
go.
but anyway, so yeah, and then I took the birth certificate of Jack Barsky out of the secret compartment, moved to another hotel, and in those days you could operate in the U.S. If you had cash, you could get on a plane without showing ID.
hmm
So I wound up in New York, found myself a hotel room, and then I had to move to another hotel room, and then I started the process of uh, trying to acquire solid, real U.S. documents, such as a driver's license and a social security card,
Yeah,
and that took
and
a
and
long.
Jack, I was going to stop you there too because that's important because you talk about getting the passport later. To get to the passport, if you do other things first, it makes it much easier to get the passport, right? But I mean, it's like, but what
Yeah,
was?
no.
Go ahead.
And then the plan that they had was brilliant. Eventually, to get a passport and then travel to, say, Switzerland and establish a company where they would funnel lots of money into that company so that I could go back to the United States reasonably wealthy and become a really dangerous agent because with you have money, you don't have to tell anybody how you got the money, or you make up a story, and you're now upper middle class, and you could join a country club where you meet some interesting people. That plan was brilliant. Well, it already almost failed for me to even get a driver's license, because they said, well, you get yourself a library card that is proof of residence. You need for a driver's license, you need a birth certificate and proof of residence. Well, when I went to the library and asked them for a library card, they asked me for documentation. Well, you know, can you prove who you are? And the birth certificate was not acceptable. So it took me several months to come up with a solution for this. And eventually, I found it and started out with a membership card of the Museum of Natural History that was nice looking. It was official and had my address, my hotel address on it. And that's when I got my library card.
Who would knew it was harder to get a library card than a
Wow.
driver's
Yeah.
license?
Yeah, they just didn't have a clue, and again, they knew I would be able to improvise eventually, and I did. And the Social Security card was difficult because I had to go for an interview at the Social Security office.
And that's, if I remember right from the story, from the book and the other stuff, that was one of the potential traps for you, right? Was this interview?
Another one, yes, because it was possible to get the Social Security number as a mature adult in those days. There were two parts of the population that were exempt from Social Security. There was farm workers and employees of religious organizations, churches, and so forth. So my backstory: we had me spend a lot of time on a farm, and then I came to New York, and the interview went very well. But I also had changed my appearance. I rubbed soap into my eyes to make them look, not as bright. Uh, I I didn't comb. I hadn't shaved for a couple of days, and I wore a T-shirt that was a little bit not clean, some stains. So I walked in like a country bumpkin.
Well, you're describing Murphy right now.
What's the problem here? I don't
What's the
understand.
problem? I wash my T-shirt once a week.
Anyway, so the interview was very short. She asked me, "So you never had a Social Security number?" I said, "No." "Why not?" "Well, I didn't need one." "What did you do? Did you work?" "Yeah, I did." "What?" I worked on Miller's Farm upstate New York." "Okay, done." And now I'm in. Now I had to get a job, right? And again, where the KGB had no clue how to get a job without having had any background in the US. Couldn't take couldn't apply for a job as a scientist, right?
Hey, I have a chemistry degree, but it's unfortunately you got to get the transcript from East Germany.
Right.
Good
Hey,
luck.
but let me ask you a question though, right here at this point. You've done all of this stuff to get to New York. So my big question too, because when I was listening to, especially, I loved listening to the podcast interview because that way you get to tell stories. But what you go through all of this and you think, yeah, you talked about going, to being having a company and a Swiss company and having all this money. But what was the end game? In other words, what were you in the United States to do?
Well, and this is again, it comes as a surprise, and it came as a surprise to me as well. I never knew, and again, this came out of the interview with Vadim Kirpichenko. The most important thing that they ascribed to the existence of illegals in the United States was our existence here. Okay, I was never told that, but you probably remember that at the height of the Cold War there was this back and forth between the KGB and the CIA, and there was a lot of mutual, kicking out other agents, and sometimes a handful of them, and then a retaliation. So the the concern was that the diplomatic relations would be severed altogether. And then who would they have had to run Hansen and Ames?
Ames, yeah.
And again, not a hint of that. What they told me was that my number one priority was to get close to people who work in the State Department, foreign policy, or at least influencers, such as I'm sorry, they mentioned like a couple of think tanks like the Hudson Institute. They were very much interested in the Trilateral Commission,
Yeah.
and also Columbia University, where Jasinski taught.
Because I'm going to ask you about something too. You talked about who was going to manage, who's going to handle Ames, who's going to handle Hansen. Because I read his book, Victor Cherkashin. Did you ever get a chance to meet Victor Cherkashin, the KBG agent who handled both of them?
No, that would be an interesting book if you could send me the title and the name of the author. I need to read that for sure.
I tell you, it was very interesting because the reason I say that is you talked about what would happen if they got kicked out, right? What would happen if we cut diplomatic ties? You needed to have a presence in the U.S. Aldrich Ames, at the time you were in the United States, at that time, the biggest traitor, as we didn't know about, to the United States, but you had a potentially a tie-in to that, right? To where maybe one of the operational runs you did, I think it was up to Vermont, may have been in support of Ames.
So, yeah, that was my last visit to Moscow. That was 1986. A fellow who I had never met came with. It was introduced by my liaison, and he asked me something that was never asked before: whether I would be willing to do something that would put me at a higher risk than I was already in. And I said, sure, why not? So I was tasked to find a spot for a dead drop in New Hampshire where something of size, like maybe a suitcase, could be deposited and exchanged. So in hindsight, I'm guessing this would have been Ames, because Ames was exposed.
He was still active during that time
with a diplomat, right? Yeah. And I did find a spot. I sent the description back to the center, and nothing ever happened. So they probably dropped the whole idea of it.
How did you figure out though that may have been related to Ames? Because certainly you weren't told at the time. Because
what for? The dead drops that I was involved in. The biggest item that was handed to me was a passport for traveling back to Moscow. So there was no need to say, well, it needs to be someplace out of the way, and you should be able to exchange something sizable. What would that have been?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Cash?
Good point.
No, not even enough. I think a bunch of documents.
Yeah.
It's just like logical thinking. I may be wrong, but I couldn't come up with another explanation.
Wow. So I just through the magic of Al Gore's amazing internet, I just emailed you the link to that book. So when you check your email later, Jack, you'll have it. But I mean, that's actually a great read because it does get into, the one thing you, as you know too, you have to study your adversary. You can't never underestimate your adversaries. You have to study them. And there's a great story in there about how Victor Cherkashin instructed Aldrich James on how to beat a polygraph, because one of the things they were concerned about, he would come in for a polygraph, and they were going to ask him if he'd had any contact with a known KGB officer.
Yeah.
So, well, he was already meeting him. He was already passing secrets. They were using a diplomat as a useful idiot, as Stalin would call him. You know, the guy had no idea what was going on, but they said, well, here's how we solve this. So they arranged to have a meeting that Ames bumped into Cherkashin, and then what does he do? He goes back and files a contact report. So now on the polygraph, he can truthfully state he has had contact with a KGB officer. Their problem was they never drilled down far enough to say, have you had, other than this, have you had contact, or have you had unauthorized contact with a KGB officer? And the one thing I said, you don't want to, you have to give your adversaries props, when they do stuff well. And the one thing a student of history and watching what Russia does, it's, to your point, the thinking of the long game. They're thinking not a year out or 2 years out. They're thinking 5 years out, 10 years out, the same way we were talking about China. That's, as you tell your story, that's the impressive thing is, I'm looking at all the pieces they're putting into place, not knowing if they're going to be there, but they've spent years now just on you alone, getting you into one place in the United States.
And I tell you, long game, this is interesting. Again, hindsight, I was told that my assignment would be about 10 years. Well, the 10-year mark passed, and there was no hint that they were calling me back, would be calling me back. I think I was way too valuable to go back home until they got spooked and thought, the FBI was on my tail.
So let's talk about that for a second, because, people can read your book to get into a lot of the personal stuff about family and stuff. I wanted to focus really on tradecraft, the operations, and what you did. But with you being in the United States, like I said, after a while, familiarity breeds contempt. You go, oh, nothing's really happening. You kind of get into your work. You're doing your job, right, at an insurance company, right?
Yeah. I was a programmer at an insurance company all that time, for sure.
Right. When was the first time you worried about your own personal safety, that you thought, a lot of people get, Murph, you and I have talked about this too. You're on surveillance and you go, I've been blown, only to realize the person, you were never blown. You just kept thinking that. But when is the first time you recall getting, I don't want to say paranoid enough, but to think, hey, the FBI is onto me. The counterintelligence people are on my tail.
Well, okay, there was a situation where there was a break-in into my apartment, and a stereo equipment was stolen. And so obviously I had to be concerned. And what I did, I did, counter surveillance, and there was no sign. The reason that this helped me determine that this was a break-in is because I was told I was the best student in Moscow with regard to counter surveillance. Every practice route I did where I was either being followed or not being followed, I always was right. And it was a contest between the best surveillance team and me, and I beat them every time. So that helped me determine that this was a break-in. And the other thing is, I was taught how to find out whether my mail was being opened. So you take an envelope, you put some little message, take an envelope, and when you glue it, you leave about 1 inch unglued. And this is what they told me. So you now mail this from some address in a big apartment building, and when it comes back to you, you open this thing, and if this is fully glued, that means some machine glued it back together.
Yeah.
I don't know. One more thing. I had a couple of measures in my apartment that I checked every time when I came back from work. I placed my shortwave radio at a certain distance from the edge of the table, and I had a chest of drawers where one of the drawers had sort of an overhang that you couldn't know whether it was closed all the way or not, unless you went below it and see, oh, wait a minute, it's not quite closed. And and I left this 8 millimeters open, and that was routine. I checked it. That wasn't touched. So when I went back to Moscow and I told them that there was a break-in, they were like really concerned. They said, maybe you shouldn't go back. And I told them, yeah, I'm not finished. I'm going to try to get a passport. Just like I couldn't fail. So, and they trusted me, and I was right. So that was the first time. The second time was more serious when I received the danger signal. It was a red dot on a support beam for the subway, and that meant get out of the country. Don't ask any questions. Don't even go back home.
How
Go
often,
pick.
and that was part of your communications plan, right? How often did you check for that contact signal or danger signal or meet signal?
It was on my way to work, so it was every day pretty much. But it was routine, I always looked at it and I never expected anything. And one day, there it was. And sorry, but I have to be truthful. The only thought that came into my head was shit. And I kept on going back to work
Why?
because I wasn't prepared to go. Because, and this is where the LOVE word comes into play. I had a 18-month-old girl daughter, beautiful girl, and I had watched her grow up. I lived with her mother, who I had married, who became a citizen because I I helped her get the green card and become a citizen, and so she was a so I was married and lived the married life with this beautiful child, and the one thing that I was trying to figure out. I was going to go back eventually. I figured, how do I take care of this girl? Because mom had only 4 years of schooling. She would have grown up in poverty if I leave. So I wasn't ready to make that decision. So I went to work. I couldn't really do anything, but immediately I started counter surveillance. I started all the measures that were at my disposal to figure out whether something is bad. Now, after that signal, this was on a Monday. On Thursday, there was my regular scheduled radio transmission. That's when they told me, you need to leave. Emergency, the FBI. We have reasons to believe the FBI is about to arrest you. So, okay, so whatever measures I could take, and I went back and forth. I honestly, the same way when I made the decision how to join the KGB, I was with this, 50-50, but, this wasn't 50-50. My rational thinking is you got to go. You got to go. Even if you stay, if you're arrested, you're not doing the girl any favors. So this was very emotional. And this is how I make the decision. And so before the decision point came, they actually broke the rule because I did not, when they now send radio transmissions every day, and I didn't respond. I was supposed to acknowledge that I had received a radio transmission with a signal someplace, and I didn't do that. I was silent, so they didn't know I could be sick. Whatever. I could have died. So they sent one of the agents to contact me, and that was against the rules, by the way. But that they broke that rule, and he approached me on a subway platform early in the morning. They knew my way to work. I had to tell him that, and that's when a second famous sentence was uttered in my life, and where he whispered into my ear, says that you got to come home or else you're dead.
Wow. As a psychiatrist would say, and how did that make you feel?
I chose to ignore this because he spoke with a heavy Russian accent, and he probably used the wrong word. He should have used busted or something like that. I could not get into a negative thinking mode. Because everything that happened to me in my life up to that point, I was pretty successful, so I couldn't imagine being caught by the FBI, even though I had to take it seriously and I had to take the dead word seriously. So in the next radiogram, they uh, called me to a dead drop operation where they were going to hand over a passport and money to get out of the country. So I went to that operation, not knowing what I was going to decide, but at least I would collect the money, right?
Hey, Jack, too, this is all happening in New York, in and around New York, right?
Yeah,
So, and the reason I'm thinking of that too, the reason you got approached, right? Because the other thing, just so people realize too, in New York is also the United Nations, which creates a
right.
diplomatic presence so that these folks can operate and come
Absolutely.
contact you.
Absolutely. There would be Soviet embassy diplomats as well as United Nations employees that were, some of whom were KGB, probably a lot of them. So I went to the dead drop operation, and uncharacteristically, they scheduled that for night time in a park in Staten Island, and I that was a spot that I found described. It was very easy to find. It was maybe a couple of 100 feet into the park, a tree stump that was hollowed out at the bottom, and that's where I was going to find a uh, a oil can, a crushed oil can. And as you know, the protocol for a dead drop is there's a signal that's set by the individual who places the container in the spot, saying, "Okay, it's there, go get it." And the signal was there, so I go to the spot, no problem finding it, and there was no oil can. So there was nobody in the park, so I had a flashlight and I went around, like maybe he dropped it accidentally someplace else. Nothing. 15 minutes, I walk out, and as I'm walking out of this park, my subconscious fed me the decision. Says I'm staying. That was not arrived by logical thinking, and nowadays I'm thinking that I'm not really in charge of my own life. It's my subconscious that constantly feeds me stuff that I'm not looking for. So yeah, and so I for the next 3 months I took more defensive measures, particularly after I sent them the goodbye letter. I sent them my last letter in secret writing. I told them that I'm not coming, and to avoid my German family being damaged by my decision, and for them not to come after me. Because one thing I did know that if that they treated defectors not very nicely, so I wanted to avoid for them to think that I was defecting. So I told him, I'm not defecting. I'm not going to betray the East Germany and the Soviet Union, but I can't come because I have HIV/AIDS. Now, I didn't know that they were going to buy into that. Um, Found out much later that they did. So for the next 3 months, I made sure that I was not predictably in the same spot at the same time. I went to work, different routes, different times, so forth, surveillance detection. Also checked again if my letters were open. None of that. So after 3 months, I pretty much knew I was in the clear. And I told my then wife, it's time to think about buying a house.
And buying a house and moving, where would you go to?
I moved to a northern suburb just on the other side of the Hudson, on the west side of the Hudson. It's called Washingtonville, and that's when I started working on the American Dream. I had not really, well, at that time the wall had come down already. All right, and so that allowed me, and the internet was functional, and I had computer resources available. So I did research. I said, what happened there? I was as surprised as the CIA and the KGB that wall would come down.
That happened so fast, so quickly. But let me ask you, but the other thing too is we know too that when they got into the archives and the Stasi and other things started being exposed, were you concerned that the wall coming down was going to expose you then?
No, and again, I I'm not a fearful person, so
And not so much fear, but I mean, just say it as an operational risk, right? Is that now that the wall's down, is there a risk that you're going to be identified?
that did not cross my mind. In hindsight, the magazine Der Spiegel went through Stasi archives. There was not a trace of me, because I guarantee you, when the KGB took me over, that whatever records were in the East German files were removed.
Well, and I read part of that Der Spiegel once they translated it, but it was amazing. Some of the stuff that the Stasi had collected, they had collected in jars what they thought were scents and pieces of cloth. If they ever had to track anybody down, they would have got the canines. I mean,
Yeah,
just the archive of stuff that they thought they needed to track people down was just amazing.
yeah, that's correct. So again, these answers that I can give you here now there's a lot of speculation, but I just tell you what uh, what governed my behavior. And after 3 months, I pretty much wiped out my task with regard to that I used to be a spy. I put this in a compartment in my brain that I isolated very much and didn't want to access ever again.
Which
And then
we
and
know that's
then
not going to be the case, right? Because at some point, that's the reason we're having this discussion today.
You wrote a book.
Yeah. Well, at some point, the FBI does get on your tail. So let's talk about, what I would refer to as the beginning of the end,
Yeah.
where things start. How, now that you look back in retrospect, how does the FBI get onto you?
Well, it was the fellow named Vasily Mitrokin who betrayed me. He was an archivist in the KGB archives, particularly the first directorate, and he had access. I mean, I don't know why that was a security breach within the KGB.
Was he the one that was turned down, though, originally by the U.S.?
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
Yeah, he showed up at the U.S. embassy in Moscow and told them what he had, and they ignored it. There was a junior person who received him, and he decided that this was a dangle, and I don't know if he even reported it at the time. But eventually, Mitrokin went to MI6 in one of the Baltic states.
And, I think that was some of the holdover of James Angleton, because of that paranoia that everybody was, for a while there when he was running it. I know they got rid of it, but everybody was a dangle. Everybody's, working against us, right? But here's the guy, because the one thing that struck me about that is when you think archivist, you think, oh, but the Russians kept records on everything. I mean, there was paperwork for everything.
Yeah, indication that the KGB was a huge bureaucracy was the fact that I had to submit an expense report every
Expense
3 months.
reports. Here, I just bribed so and so. Here's my expense report. Yeah.
And the expense reports, in secret writing, I was limited to 2 pieces of paper for one letter in secret writing. An expense report took up valuable real estate, and given the fact that they spent millions of rubles training me and running me, by comparison, the expenses that I reported on were in the hundreds. Bureaucracy taking over, and I understand that, I have more friends than who are ex-CIA, ex-FBI, and they're complaining about the bureaucracy. I don't know what the CIA was like, but bureaucrats are like mushrooms after a hot summer rain. They just come up and they infiltrate every organization.
Murphy, does any of this sound familiar?
Oh yeah, that's the one thing you don't miss in retirement is all the bureaucracy. But when we talk about mushrooms, we always talk about how you keep them in the dark and feed them shit.
Maybe that's what you do to illegals as well as bureaucrats.
Maybe.
So the archivist. So how long does it take? Like, say, we're looking in retrospect, but how long does it take from the time when MI6 gets a hold of this information until you're put into jeopardy to where the FBI gets onto you? How long of a time frame was that?
That was about 7 years, roughly.
So for 7 years, I mean, at what point into when you say, "Hey, I'm not defecting, but I'm walking away. I'm no longer, on the job." How long did it take you to get comfortable? As that I've pulled it off. I'm going to be Jack Barsky. Nobody's going to know who I am. I'm going to be able to live and die here.
Yeah, there was after the 3 months, and even more so when I was able to move into my first house, which was roughly 1 year after I resigned. And this I lived like a normal American life, and and we had another child, and I knew I would never see Germany again. I would not. I had given up the idea of applying for a passport again.
Did your wife know who you were?
Not at all. No.
Not at
So
that point.
not at that point, right? But that's what I'm saying. But part of the, it's living a lie, which what part of that's what spying is and espionage. It's living a lie. So, but you're comfortable living this lie now because now you're out of the spotlight. You're in, like you say, living the American dream. And so, what are you doing for work at this point? What are you doing to make the American dream work?
I was a pretty good programmer, and I made good money, and then I was bumped up into management, and I did pretty well in management too, and I got more and more responsible positions, including chief information officer of a company that is today and was then the largest independent energy producer in the country, and a co-owner of a nuclear plant. And I was still operating under my false doc no under the illegally obtained documents, and I was able to visit that nuclear plant, and eventually I wound up at an organization that runs the electric grid, a particular electric grid in the United States. I'm not going to name the company because I'm on a non-disclosure there. So I was really clean, but in those days I was already under the protection of the FBI. I wasn't just fully legalized. That's the whole point. But the FBI introduced themselves 9 years after my resignation.
How did they introduce themselves?
Well, it was very elaborate. They had a whole team. Um, so they knew that I commuted from Newark, New Jersey to Eastern Pennsylvania, and I had to cross the Delaware Bridge, toll bridge, and they rented themselves. It was not a guy in disguise. They rented themselves a state trooper. And as I'm going through the toll gate there, he waved me to the side and came over to my vehicle. And I rolled down the window. He says, routine traffic stop. Please step out of the vehicle. Now, at that point, it didn't click. Routine traffic stop, you don't step out of the vehicle. But it just did. And as I'm stepping out there, there's a fellow coming from my right. And these are like the moments that you will never forget. And as I'm turning to him, he flipped open this ID, and without even having to read it, I knew the gig's up. I knew it was FBI, and he said, "FBI, we would like to have a talk with you. Please step into this car." There was a car parked, and there was a fellow in the vehicle, in the back seat, who had a gun strapped to his ankle. I think it was visible on purpose because now I knew this was serious shit.
Yeah, but so let's take that for a second. You weren't arrested. It's not like they did when they arrested Ames or Hansen, throw you
Right.
down, put cuffs on you. You were
Right.
I mean, you were going to be detained no matter. But so at that point, what goes through your mind? In other words, do you think about how do I get out of this, or who turned me in, or who betrayed me? What are you thinking now?
No, no, I didn't go back that way. But when I had collected my thoughts, I asked a question. I said, "Am I under arrest?" And there was a one word answer: no. So then my subconscious again took over because it knew that I need to be likable. So I made a little joke. I said, "What took you so long?" And that uh, uh, I saw the guy sitting next to me, like not, I wasn't able to suppress a little smile. And then the fellow who drove the car, the one who introduced himself, he turned around quickly and said, "Jack, I want to tell you, this may not be the worst day in your life." No, there were no promises made, no nothing. They took me to a motel, and they had. And I found that out afterwards. The motel is L-shaped, right next to the Delaware Water Gap, and they had rented one wing of that motel, and there were armed guards at both ends. Okay, and eventually I found out they also had a whole team in waiting because they had planned, if everything went well, to let me go back home. But in case they miscalculated that I might actually run after all, they had a team there, and they told me that if you think, and when they let me go, if you think you can run, we have every intersection covered here. So it was a massive operation, and they found out pretty quickly that it wasn't necessary because the next rendezvous we had, I showed up.
So, from a just from a standpoint of looking at all the effort that went into it, at some point you got to. I mean, I don't. Does the ego play into a little bit that you must be a big fish because of all of this effort they're going through?
No. See, the thing is, uh, I intellectually now I'm sort of there with regard to big fish. You know, having read the Kirpichenko and what they went through to select people like me, and then and getting a lot of feedback from, you know, I have a friend who used to do counterintelligence in the FBI, and he is very familiar with illegal cases, and he would state that I'm the only one who actually had operational tasks. Everybody else was just here to live here. So intellectually, I have to sort of embrace this, but but emotionally, I did what I had to do emotionally, and it's what is much more important to me now is is having become a really good human being, and having seen the light, and having been able to make this change uh, to now be sort of the Humpty Dumpty that was put together and had the chance to figure out who he is, right? Uh, I can't. Arrogance is stupidity, okay? Because I met a lot of people who are smarter than me. I met a lot of people who have talents. When I'm saying, "Oh my God, I wish I could do that," and and when I start thinking about the universe, I know I'm like this small. So for me to be arrogant about who I was as some kind of an elite person, so what? It's stupid. And you know, I give you uh, um, one more thing about this. I gave a presentation at the National Mensa Convention several months ago, and they gave me a free test, and I qualified, and they invited me to join Mensa. And between you and me, and I wouldn't say this to a Mensa member, but you would have to pay me a lot of money to join an organization that is proud of something that did not help create. This my functioning brain got me where I'm at today, right? And that was given to me at birth. End of story.
So what what was your decision now to say? Do you cooperate? Do you not cooperate? What led you to the point? Because at some point, like you say, if you get rolled up, they want to debrief you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there was no doubt in my mind I would cooperate, and I told him right off the bat. I said, you know, and at that point, I had already become sort of, at least intellectually, and obviously based on the standard of living and the fact that I had a family, I my ideology had become consumerism, so I felt good about my life. I loved my children. My wife was still good looking in those days.
Couldn't see
Sorry.
yourself going back to communism at this point, right?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I had clearly had become an anti-communist because I was able to find out all the lies that we were fed in those days, and including that Vladimir Lenin was a selfless revolutionary. Not true. He was into power, and he told he invented the Red Terror, and you know what that is. Killing enemies of the revolution and whoever else you want to kill. No, no. So anyway, so there was no doubt in my mind I would cooperate. And when we sat down in the motel, I started the conversation. I said, uh, I know one thing, that the only way my family and I can get out of the situation with the least amount of damage is if I cooperate fully, and I'm 100% willing to do so.
But you also had another issue, though. You were in the country illegally under an illegally obtained birth certificate. You technically
Yeah.
weren't a U.S. citizen, so that's part of the calculation, right? Is how do you become, because this is part of the something that the FBI does or helps get for you, right? But how do you become a quote U.S. citizen legally?
Okay. So that conversation did not take place. I was never promised anything. So for a period of like 5, 6 weeks, when I met with the lead agent who debriefed me as thoroughly as you can debrief anybody, then I had to pass a lie detector test. Once I passed that test, I was finally told there's a path to citizenship. You're allowed to stay here. It's going to take a while, but rest assured, we're going to get you there. Now, that took quite a while. And again, there was a bureaucratic element involved in that. So what the FBI managed to give me was a new driver's license, so that the records would show that Jack Barsky got the driver's license, and but they had to, for me to uh, become a citizen, there had to be a document created that showed that Jack Barsky entered the United States, right? And there was no documentation of my entry. So eventually, and it took him a while to figure that one out. And eventually, the fellow who was my liaison at the time found the only person at FBI headquarters who knew how to do it. So they took me into a car, drove me across the border with Canada, turned around, and I got this like piece of paper. It's a document that says Jack Barsky entered the United States on this day. And that they used to get me the driver's license. And then to get the passport, the U.S. passport and citizenship, bureaucracy set in again. So the FBI decided that I should go the regular path, and that means nothing behind the scenes, just like apply, and then eventually, you'd be called in, be sworn in officially. So I was called in for an interview, and the person who interviewed me asked me, "Are you still a German citizen?" I said, "I don't know." So what he did, and this is like I reconstructed, but that's the way it would have happened. He took my application and put it on the uh, to be investigated pile. And that pile disappeared someplace. The FBI didn't know where it was. It took 3 years for them to finally find the application. And then I got a call from Homeland Security to show up at the office the next day. And they apologized, and I was sworn in right then and there.
Wow. Now, were these folks unwitting, as they say, unwitting accomplices? Did the people at the passport control when you went for your interview, did they know who you were at that time, or was this they were just treating you as any other citizen or any other person coming in, wanting to get citizenship?
They only knew that I was born in Germany.
Okay.
And they weren't briefed about my background. If the FBI had done this, through the back door, it wouldn't have been a problem. But they just figured, I should do it the official way. So,
Yeah. Well, because the other thing too is that gets then your wife at the time, right? The children, that gets them all legal status, so you don't have to worry about them.
Yeah.
So, there's so many different places we could go through, but let's go back to what you said at the beginning, because now I want to talk about this for a little bit because of your unique perspective. I'm very concerned about the indoctrination of some of these kids. We see what's going on now with Israel and Hamas, between Russia and Ukraine, China, Taiwan, but it's really, I'm seeing some of the same things that were happening to you back then during communism, the education and the indoctrination, becoming to believe something. You were kind of starting to talk about a cautionary tale. So let's revisit that for a little bit. What's the cautionary tale the United States ought to be worried about right now?
Cautionary tale is that I think we have two generations of American citizens, young people, who went through a school system that doesn't teach how to think anymore. And let me tell you, I was on a Zoom session with a couple of guys, and they were all wondering how come the Hamas, the story about the Palestinians being always victims and the Hamas freedom fighters, how come people believe it? And I told them, yeah, this is because the damage has been done internally by ourselves, because 20 years ago, that kind of story would have been rejected by the majority of Americans because they would have had some background about history, geography, and they would have been able to think independently. There's one thing that I found when I came here, right early on, when I had some exposure to the American education system, and I noticed that, okay, so most of the tests are multiple choice and true and false. So the focus was always on teaching facts, not so much thinking. And believe it or not, other than the brainwashing with regard to communism, in East Germany, we were taught thinking. 50% of my high school curriculum was math and science. So, and this, I don't even know how to fix this because the teachers union is far out there. I'm sorry, I'm getting political, but I can't help myself. It's far out on the left, and there's many teachers who have been brainwashed themselves, and they're, as I said before, they're very smart people in this country who believe in stories and who don't validate the stories the same way I believed in communism. The only difference here is there are other opinions available, but we shut ourselves down because we don't want to, we want to keep the psychological equilibrium that we have created for ourselves. And most people have a real big problem to be confronted with the real truth and be shown that they had beliefs that were totally wrong. I can give you the comparison between, let's say, my friend who worked for the Stasi and myself. I had the luxury of decontaminating slowly and find out this truth step by step. He did not. When that wall came down, he had two choices with regard to how to react: embrace the fact that he was working for an organization that was evil and lied to him, or become a victim and still stick to his beliefs. And he might not be deep red, but he's still pink. He could not digest that. It's the psychology of not being able to deal with the truth. Same thing happened when Germany lost the war. My grandparents never once spoke about the Nazi part of their life, and the people that found out about the Holocaust. There were a lot of people who denied it, and there's deniers to this day. So, and this is the danger that we're in this country right now. That what is in a lot of people's mind is going to be very, very difficult to change. We should make the effort. The truth shall prevail, hopefully. If it doesn't, this would be the end of the Western world. And it isn't just the United States.
No, and there's
It happened in Germany as well.
there's this crap going around on TikTok right now where these people have rediscovered Osama bin Laden's letter.
Oh, yeah.
And now he was right. The Jews are the problem. I mean, I just get I know you didn't want to get political, but we don't want to get political. But at some point, this is the difference between right and wrong. This is the difference between good and evil. And because I quit saying, how can people believe that? And I start looking, I said, well, I'll tell you how they can believe it. To exactly to your point, we have generation after generation now that's been indoctrinated, not educated, but indoctrinated. And now they will go out and they'll ask these kids, well, point to Israel on a map, point to Gaza on a map. Nobody knows where it is, but they're up in arms. And they're reading Osama bin Laden's letter going, oh, look, he said it too. It's the Jews who are the problem. Well,
and then Barack Obama at least hinting that Gaza was occupied by Israel. That's a lie.
There has not been a Jewish military presence or official presence in Gaza since 2005, but you wouldn't know that by listening to the news.
Yep, and the other thing that Israel stole the land from the Palestinians. Well, if anybody stole it, it was the United Nations unanimously
in 1947. Yeah. Well, look, Jack, I know we could go a lot of places. And like I said, there's a lot of things about your history. But the biggest thing, if you folks want to listen to more about this, just go to Jack Barsky, Barsky, jackbarsky.com, which, by the way, is his official and legal name now. No worries about that. You can find him. It will not. It doesn't say Jack Barsky, AKA.
Yeah, but one thing I got to tell you, I have 2 birthdays. So my birthday was November 13th.
Which one? The Jack one or your real one?
That's the Jack Barsky birthday.
Okay.
The German was born in May. The reason that we got we kept the November birthday is because when I was made legal by the FBI, we couldn't we couldn't have Jack Barsky's birth date because he was born in 1944. And if I kept that, I would have been able to collect Social Security 5 years prior to my real age. And that would have meant the FBI would have helped me commit a crime. So we decided to just change the birth year.
It's those little things that catch up to you.
Not to make a fuss. But interestingly, my daughter, who knew my real birthday, once came into my office, interrupted the staff meeting, and wished me happy birthday. And I was really lucky that none of them knew my birthday. I wouldn't talk about it. But if one of them had known, wait a minute, this is May. You're born in November. What's wrong here?
Well, hey, let's finish up because we've kept you for quite a while too. But let's finish up. I want to talk about the first time you officially admitted out loud in public your background, your real background, and how that was received.
All right, that actually was in Germany. that was Der Spiegel got the scoop. But in the United States, in English, it was a 60 Minutes interview, which is available, by the way, now on YouTube.
Yeah, that's where I found it, and that was like sending shockwaves. How did that, how did that affect a lot of the people that you had worked with, that you had known?
Well, there were a couple of companies. This interview aired on Sunday. There were a couple of companies where not much work was done on Monday.
Why?
Interestingly enough, there was no anger coming at me other than from the board of directors of the company I was employed by at that time. And we eventually, after negotiating back and forth, we decided to part company in an amicable kind of manner. But in all my public appearances, and I do a lot of public speaking, I have had literally only one person stand up and saying something hostile and angry, simply because they understand that I did what I did not for money, not out of ego, because I thought I served the right cause, and I saw the error of my ways, and wound up joining the good guys.
Well, very interesting the way you mentioned that. We talked to Jim Lawler about this too, about some of the motivations, and they would use mice, money ideologically, compromise, ego. But I tended to see a lot, just, when you go back and read the stories and talk to people like James Olson was head of counterintelligence for CIA for a long time. A lot of the people that would defect from the Soviet Union or Russia, it was about ideology. Exactly to your point. They discovered the lies. They did not want money. They were still loyal Russians, but they were against communism. They were against, the system, right? And so I think for us, I mean, I'm just talking as an American. When I see somebody like you, if you'd got up and said, "Hey, I was KGB," even if you'd been my next door neighbor, it would have been one of those things that says, "Wow, man, number one, you did good because you fooled me, but number two, welcome to America." I think that's kind of the difference.
Yeah.
For me, it would be like, we know that you were out there. We know that there were people like you out there, and you were good at what you were doing. So, hey, but officially, so what's the official date when you became an American on paper for real?
I would have to look it up on my.
Just generally, just about how many years ago?
7 years ago.
All right. Well, here's us, me and Murph, saying, "Welcome to America."
Bienvenidos.
Thank you, and I'm glad to be here. I mean, as I said, living in this country and still operating in what is mostly still freedom, with some limitations, but allowed me to really become myself, allowed me to be an individual, and allowed me to, be in charge of my own life instead of like being told. If I had been put in we had. There's a German word pops into my head and I can't translate. We had a mandatory 2-year service in the military after college. I would have made a horrible soldier
because you're anti-authoritarian.
Oh yeah.
Well, yeah, and most of my commanding officers at the low level would have been stupid people.
Before you go,
well, I have a choice with whom I interact. Okay. And it's a good thing that I left corporate America, because I'm not saying that they were all stupid, but they were not very interesting. Talking to people like you or like journalists or artists, I have so many friends that are good at what they're doing that I couldn't be doing, and my life became really, really interesting. And so I'm a happy camper, with a couple of exceptions, but I don't want to whine about those.
One last question for you, Jack. Do you feel any threat towards your life now?
No, and we discussed this with the FBI when I told them about the 60 Minutes proposal, and we both agreed, as long as I'm in the Western world, the danger to me is not zero, but very minimal, for two reasons. A, I did not betray the motherland. we take very seriously in Russia. I was a German, right? And B, my case is old. And if there's anybody who might have had a personal animus towards me, there were, with one exception, that was my liaison in Moscow, who was same age. They're all most likely not with us anymore. So, and you guys know that it is not easy, even for the elite GRU, to carry out an assassination on the territory of another country. Even that top team that went after Skripal couldn't.
They got nailed, and I'll tell you who they got nailed by. There is a unit inside New Scotland Yard, and they basically, what they're very good at is they're connectors. They can watch lots and lots of video and put things together, and that's so. Even then, you look at Israeli though, Israeli Mossad going into an Arabic country and assassinating somebody. So much video surveillance, so much electronic stuff. Now it's hard to get away with it. But look, for you though, this is us saluting you. First of all, you know what? Again, you don't. We were not that we were the same age, but we were on opposite sides for a long time. But you always have to respect a worthy adversary, because if you don't, you end up being beaten by that adversary because you underestimated them. You let your ego get to it. So,
No, you're right. But like to summarize this up, those teams that they may have in Russian intelligence, there are a few, and if they have, and if Vladimir Putin has a list, and I'm on that list, I'm at the bottom.
well, that's assuming Vladimir Putin is still alive and his body doubles aren't out there doing his work for him right now.
Oh, don't go there, because there may be another body double walking around someplace in another country.
Well, look, Steve, any final thoughts before we close this up?
It's just this kind of goes. What I'm getting ready to say just kind of goes against what was brought up because I was, indoctrinated as a patriotic American. But it's been an honor to talk to you today. The fact that you're giving us your time to come on the show and tell us the intricacies of your life. I mean, you have experienced things that 99% of the world would never go through, and how this all worked out. I read in your back that you became a Christian, and I'm very proud of you for that. So it has been an honor to sit here and just pick your brain, read your book. I tell everybody, read the book, Deep Undercover. It's one of those books that's really hard to put down.
Allow me a closing comment here.
Mm-hmm.
You're our guest.
Because when you say you were indoctrinated, there is no need to indoctrinate somebody to the brilliance of the American Constitution. But it starts with the acknowledgement that not all men are good, and the acknowledgement that very often the most ruthless and evil people wind up on the top of a pyramid, and the Constitution, the separation of power is the only way to manage the tendency of organizations becoming pyramids, and large organizations eventually at the top. There's always the potential that an evil dictator emerges. And that doesn't have to be indoctrination. That is based on my observation and logic.
Oh, very good.
Scientifically concluded, Bob. It's science, folks. It's science. The U.S. Constitution works. Well, hey, look, Jack, again, this is us saluting you. First of all, welcome to America. Glad that you're here on our side now. I'm glad that you're continuing to help out folks. Folks, go to his site, jackbarsky.com. Get his book, Deep Undercover, My Secret Life and Tangled Allegiances as a KGB Spy in America. I'm telling you, you don't want to put it down. It's great reading. So thank you. You guys don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. Everybody else, hang on for the debrief. Well, I'll tell you what. Think about this. You leave your home country, you go to another country, you're working for an intelligence service not of your own country, and then going to yet another country, and the biggest adversary of ours at that time for the Soviet Union, the KGB, the United States of America. I mean, just what he went through, a smart guy and everything else, but it's amazing what the amount of effort the Soviet Union, the Russians went through to identify, indoctrinate, cultivate, train, and position him for nobody knows what would have happened, right? But he was in place as a sleeper.
Yeah. And 5 years of training to do this. I mean, just think about that. You don't even go to college for that long to get your bachelor's degree.
Well, you haven't met some of the people I know then.
Well, I might have gone a little longer than 4 years, but you get my point here, right? And then even as he said, there were still things that they didn't anticipate that almost tripped him up once he got here to the United States, or even when he was in Canada. So it's holy cow! You see this on movies, but you just always wonder: is this real? Do they really do stuff like that? And I think Jack just proved absolutely they do that. They're always looking to infiltrate our country and knock us down.
Well, and a lot of his story was the inspiration, and helped craft the story. I think it was on A&E, but called The Americans. About the 2 Russian illegals that were here. And I mean, this is think about that. This is. Even he mentioned, because we talked later, I think I talked before about Anna Chapman, some of the other GRU illegals, the other folks, but it's not the same way it was. The caliber of people now are not the same, I believe, as the caliber of people during the Cold War. The people like the Jim Lawlers and the Rick Prados and the people who were there. I mean, when you were working what was called a denied area, I mean, that was tough to operate on. That's like going into an area and everybody, the KGB, they're all trailing you, watching you, and you've still got to figure out how to do your job. So
it's just, I tell you what, I'm just sitting here thinking, this is just another one of the unbelievable guests we've had on Game of Crimes. I read a social media post just this morning where a lady had heard Mike Martinez's interview. Mike's the San Diego police officer who was involved in 4 shootings, 3 of them involved deaths. And that was within just the first couple of years of his job. But what he went through, and she was just in awe of Mike, what he had done, that he was willing to be transparent, open, and, tell his whole story. And then she ends up like, great job, Murphy Morgan. You guys have the best guests. And we do. I mean, I'm not bragging. I'm shocked that we can get these people, but you folks aren't going to believe who we got coming up later. We're lining people up now. We still got a list of potentially 50, 60 people to interview. A lot of you listeners send in suggestions to us, and we try to follow up on those. So please keep sending those in. But we're going to do our best to knock your socks off in 2024.
And we've got a great guest we're going to lead off 2024 with, and we've got another person you have seen. I guarantee you, if you are into cop shows at all, the guest we have coming up going to be a familiar name, but we're going to save that till next week. So anyway, we hope you guys enjoyed that episode. If you did, again, head on over to Apple, Spotify, hit those 5 stars. Let us know what you think about it. It's magic. We don't know how it works. It's Disney. It's David Copperfield, David Blaine. Pick your favorite street music or magician. It all works. Also, head on over to GameOfCrimesPodcast.com. Pick up Jack's book. Go to JackBarsky.com and pick up his book, Deep Undercover: My Secret Life and Tangled Allegiances as a KGB Spy in America. Him and Boris and Natasha were operating illegally in the United States. So, but also follow us on that thing they call social media at Game of Crimes on Twitter, Game of Crimes Podcast on Facebook and the Instagram. Also, head on over to Facebook and make sure you type in Game of Crimes fans. Our favorite mafia queen, Sandy Salvato, will determine whether or not you are worthy as she wields her iron fist with the velvet glove. But also hit us up on Patreon, patreon.com/Game of Crimes. We've got some great reviews that are coming up. We've got some fun things that are going to coming up in December. And we put a lot of content that we don't put out on our free podcast. There's a lot of content there. Some of it's serious, a lot of it's fun, but you're going to enjoy it nonetheless, right, Murph? So
absolutely. And if you don't, you know what? Let us know. I mean, Morgan and I love doing what we're doing here. We're getting to talk to all these law enforcement heroes around the world. If there's something that you don't like, it's okay to let us know that. We can have differences of opinion, and we want to listen to our listeners. And those of you that say Morgan interrupts too much, we've heard you. I talk to him all the time. It goes running one ear and out the other. So, what can I do? But and I even mentioned there that somebody complained about us name dropping. Well, we name drop with our guests because that's how you build rapport. Anyway, we're still open to those comments. Those folks are still our friends. So let us know what you think, please.
Well, the king and I hate name droppers. That's all I can say,
The king.
Well, until next week, comrades, good and bad, everybody, thank you once again for playing biggest, baddest, most dangerous game of all from Russia. like Sean Connery, from Russia with Love, the Game of Crimes.
See y'all next week.